myself and put myself in some good company. All of these people have failed in one way, shape, or form. I'm not going to go into any specific ones, but I used to live in Wilmington, North Carolina, and that's where Michael Jordan is from. So the big story around there is Michael Jordan didn't even make his high school basketball team. And that's true because he wasn't devoted and he didn't really try all that hard. And then he did, and then he became who he is today. So all of these other folks, just to pick out some, Stephen King submitted 40 manuscripts for different books before somebody finally took his first one. So I can't imagine writing 40 different books and just still having the wherewithal to say, I'm going to try it one more time. And he gives his wife credit for making him do it one more time. Even Oprah Winfrey, she was a newswoman and she was fired from her job. Do you know why she was fired from her job? Because they said she cared too much about the stories. She wasn't objective and she got into the stories. So then she started a talk show where she cared, and there you go. And that's me, because I'm a failure. So this is my failure roadmap. You put on roller skates. My dad had a dirt floor garage, so I went in there. Went to go get my brother's skates, which were up way about there. I jumped, I fell down, broke my arm. I don't know if any of you have ever had a mother who was a nurse, but there is no sympathy whatsoever. So I'm like, Mom, I think I broke my arm. It's like hanging there. And she's like, you're fine. Like 2 weeks later, we went to the hospital and got an x-ray, and it was broken. She's like, that's okay, fine. So what happened there? So I never jumped on roller skates again. So I learned something from my failure. So that's what this whole speech is about. If we can look and see why we fail, maybe why we do the things that we do, but even better, go back and look at that and evaluate and try to not do those things again. My kids play soccer, this is great. I don't know if you can see that line or not, but I've seen those kind of fields before. So the fear of failing is adikyphobia. I'm not a medical doctor, but that's what's considered the fear of failing. And I look at failing as a good thing. I want my kids to fail. And that sounds weird, but I do want them to fail because when they fail, they start to learn, and those are teachable moments. I've been a teacher for a long time. I've been a coach, and I think what really happens a lot of times is I've got a 13-year-old. Every time I try to tell her something, she goes, nah. Like, do it this way. No, I'm not going to do it this way. I'm going to do it this way. I'm like, okay, do it, fail, and then we'll talk about what you did wrong. And that's kind of where I need to be at this point in my life. If you're at a 13-year-old, you know the drill. So one of the things that I try to do is my kids will come home and go, oh, those referees were terrible. Or, oh, my teacher, they don't teach me anything. So I look at them and go, what is your locus of control? And then they go crazy and they just think that's crazy. But why are you blaming somebody else? Is it actually somebody else's fault or is it your fault? So the locus of control for me is a big thing. So can I look at a situation and say, I had this control of this situation and this is how I handled it. We can't control what we can't control. So we can't blame everybody. I always like when you get an A, what do you say? I got an A. When you get an F, what do you say? He gave me an F. It's the locus of control, right? It's not, I earned an F, he gave me an F. It's not, I earned an A, not he gave me an A. So what I try to do is I try to take those moments and say, what could you have done differently? Oh, my teammates weren't so good. Well, don't look at them. You can't control them. What did you do? Part of that is then the kind of the growing process. So where does the fear of failing come from? Sometimes it's parents. Sometimes parents I know I have to calm myself down sometimes. Sometimes my son gets in the car, he's 14, and he plays soccer, and sometimes when they lose, he doesn't like to get in the car. I don't know if you ever had these conversations on long car rides home, like, you could have done this, and you could have done that, and sometimes, and then I gotta look at myself and go, he's 14, it'll be okay. So sometimes it comes from parents. sometimes parents step in too much. As a teacher, I've had those experiences over the years. So that the idea of failing is good, but your kids have to fail. People have to fail. It's something that we have to do. If you protect your children or people from failure their entire lives, when they actually do fail, it's going to become a major problem. And I've seen this happen over and over again, where you have students come into even a college level, and they get a C, and they can't handle it because they've always gotten A's, and if they didn't get an A, mom or dad called the principal and talk to the teacher to do, or the kid didn't start on a team, so the parents are calling the coaches. I think those things, for me, when my kid doesn't start, I'm like, good, you probably didn't deserve to start. And that's just the way I look at things. So by having those failures early on, then we can look at those later on and say, what could I have done to improve myself? Bullying sometimes comes into that fear of failing. I taught high school for 5 years, so bullying was a big thing in high school and middle school. So sometimes we get bullied into trying to not fail. Traumas, if you have some sort of trauma, you might have a fear of failure. So I remember one time I had a motorcycle and I was wiped out on my motorcycle. I was coming around a turn, it was too fast, it was a little wet, and I almost wiped out. So every time I go around a turn, a left-handed turn, even now, sometimes I still get that in my head, and I kind of seize up and my wife's like, what's the matter with you? But there's just nothing that sometimes there's that fear there. Schools. You're supposed to get what? Students here, what are you supposed to get in schools? What kind of grades?
Good grades.
You're supposed to get good grades. You're supposed to get A's. If you don't get A's, then there's something wrong with you, right? But the way I see things is, even as a teacher, if you're learning something, then I'm happy as a teacher. I know the students want the grades because I can put that on my resume, and my GPA shows higher. But I think we put a lot of pressure on people, and therein lies the fear of failing. And then sports as well. But I always look at, what's a good baseball batting average? 300? So you're failing 70% of the time, right? So it's okay. If you fail, it's fine. So one day I'm like, I've got this speech, and what am I going to talk about? So I thought dirt, of course, and you'll see why later. So why do we fail? Well, we doubt ourselves, right? That nagging feeling in the back of your head. Did you ever just not do something because you thought you were not going to be good at it? I don't like that. My kids will come to me sometimes and go, I can't do this. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. You can do whatever you want to do. It's just you don't want to do it right now. So nagging feeling you will not be successful. Insecurity, you lack self-efficacy. You don't think you can do it. Just recently, Simone Biles, the gymnast, she did something that nobody has ever done in a competition before. So she had the self-efficacy to do it. And you know what? Now what will happen is other people will start doing it because they see other people doing it. At one point it was the 4-minute mile. Well, nobody will ever break the 4-minute mile. Now everybody breaks the 4-minute mile. So you have to think that you can do these types of things. Reluctance. Is your inner voice holding you back? Sometimes that might be a good thing, but sometimes give yourself a chance. Try it. We're not perfect at things every time we do. I think me as teaching. The first time I taught, I was a blithering idiot. I'm up in front of a class. You might think that now. I'm up in front of a class. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm stammering. I'm using a lot of filler words. All these different things that are going on. And then after you become more comfortable with it, and after you understand what's going on, you get rid of that reluctance. And then you got that trepidation, so you fear the situation. But most situations can be solved, and you don't have to fear that. have that fear. It's one of my wife's favorite things. I asked you to bring one thing. I was going to call this speech "Soil Yourself," but that'd be something else. But I want you to turn this. I want you to turn the dirt into soil. See where I'm going with this? Dirt is like ugly. Soil, you can plant things in. So, how do I get over fear? I set goals. So get quick wins. If you could get quick wins, that's good, right? You build up those little building blocks. Like, you've got to have that little building block there, which can build another one, which can build another one, and then eventually you're on your way. Open your mind, visualize, right? So see yourself doing these things. And I don't know, did you ever watch The Waterboy ever? I love that movie. It's like one of my go-to movies. But one of the things that he says, I'm going to use this as my tackling fuel. His anger is his tackling fuel, and he's visualizing, he's seeing these people as people who kind of tormented him his entire life. So if you can see yourself being successful, you're more likely to do that. Some people have mantras, and they keep repeating the mantras over and over again. Identify your fear. Why are you afraid of it? Why are you afraid of doing something? And a lot of people are. They're afraid of trying something new. They're afraid of trying. I teach statistics, and one of the first things I do when I teach statistics is we have like a general couch session. Like, okay, I know everybody hates math. Why do we hate math? At what point in life did you decide to hate math? It's usually 8th grade. I had an algebra teacher at 8th grade who was blah, blah, blah. But, I'm going too quick here. But why are you afraid of the situation? If you open your mind sometimes, and if you look at this objectively, it might not be so bad. And then learn from your mistakes. Evaluate and adjust. Monitor and adjust. That was my favorite mantra as a football coach. So you look at the situation, you monitor, you adjust, you try again, and life is like that as well. I keep hitting my button for some reason. I'm using my hands too much. I thought that was fine. I was drowning, and I know that's awful. But I thought that was funny because it looks like LOL, but that's supposed to be some guy drowning. Again, I have a strange sense of humor. So how can you use failures? We're all born failures. Did you ever watch a young kid try to walk? What happens? The first time they get up, what do? Boom, right back down. But they get right back up and they try it again, and then boom, they go right back down, and they keep getting up. And that if you look at yourself like that, sometimes you'll have these things happen in life. I've had opportunities where I went on job interviews and I'm like, I need this job, this is going to be the best job, and I don't get the job. So what do? I could go crawl in a hole, go cry, go do whatever, but you learn from those things, and sometimes those things are blessings in disguise. Let people fail. So one of the things that I like to do in my classes is, I call it I know we talk about it here, the iterative process. So the first time you do anything, you don't do it right. I don't expect you to do it right. We're not perfect the first time we do everything. So what I like to do, though, is I like to get you to try to be perfect, or at least as close to that as possible. So you try it the first time, you get feedback, you try it again. If it's still not good, you get more feedback and you try it again. And I think those are the good building blocks to any type of. How many of you are in relationships or have been in relationships? It's constantly I fail all the time with my wife, because she's like, did you hear me? I'm like, were you talking? Great, this is streaming. She's at home sick today, so I'm like, oh great, she's gonna be like, the locks will be changed. But let people fail. Model the correct behavior. So if you're looking for someone to do something, model that behavior. If you do it, other people are more than likely to do it. If I show up late every day, if I'm the boss or the supervisor and I show up late every day, I've just given everyone a permission to show up late every day. So model that behavior. Find teachable moments. Sometimes the hardest moments are the most teachable moments. So sometimes people get down, sometimes people get upset with themselves. Those are the times to go in and teach and say, this is the situation. Again, try again. Keep trying and trying and trying. Sometimes a lot of times you're going to fail, but try it. Show progress. So if you can see you're making progress, then you're more than likely to keep trying. Just those little building blocks or those little wins sometimes will get you over the edge, over the finish line pretty quickly. And then what it does is it reduces future anxiety. So if you become successful in some things, then I had to change my water heater. I don't know if you ever had to change a water heater or not, but I've never done it before, and there's gas involved. So I'm like, I've seen people do this before, and I could probably do it myself. And I did it. I was Googling everything and YouTubing everything. But now I feel confident that I could do it again. The house is still there, it didn't blow up yet, so I think we're in good shape. But it gives me a better thought process about how I can do things in the future. Math joke. Drives me crazy. All right, so finally I'm going to probably wrap it up here in a bit. So what does failing do? It builds your resiliency. If you want to, this world is tough, right? Sometimes you win and sometimes you lose, and a lot of times you lose. But if you understand that you're going to lose, and you understand what happened and how you fail and how you can come back, it builds resiliency. I'll tell you, the students that I have that are the most resilient, whether they're the most brilliant students or not, are usually the ones that are most successful. Overcome your fears. So you've got to find a way to overcome your fears. Those quick wins, that failing and coming back and being successful will help you do that. And a lot of times failing causes innovation, right? Maybe I'm trying something, I do something, and it's like, wow, I didn't ever think about doing it that way. So that could cause some sort of innovation. And finally, this is Michael Jordan again, and this is one of the things that I always tell my kids. Just try it, right? Just try it. If you're not good at it, that's fine. I think it goes with food too, right? Our rule in the house is just try it. If you don't like it, that's fine. But with anything, give it a shot. What do you have to lose?
So what I wanted to do with my talk was look retrospectively at a career, at the points at which you were offered a suggestion or an opportunity was presented to you and you said yes. And that saying yes changed a trajectory for your career or built out and branched out from that other opportunities. But also that there's a whole lot of your career that you cannot plan, and that saying yes is a part of how you build it. So here's elements of my perspective is that of an artist, so the particular examples I'm showing you tonight are from my own career and other artists. So that's sort of how I kind of understand networking in my world. Failure, however, should be in there. We'll tuck it in there right next to resilience. So most of these examples, well, all of the examples involve mentorship. So the examples that I'm showing you start in school, all of them, but different points in school. So I'm showing you two different examples from my own career. And really the way that I've kind of designed this is to almost take a resume and think about the resume as having an infrastructure to it. So if you were to lift up elements from your resume and look underneath, what is supporting that resume? What's there propping all of that up? How do you arrive at those lines? Because really, when you're a student and you think about having a resume or building one, some of those things seem really difficult, or you look at people so much further along in your career and it seems almost impossible to arrive there. But we all started at the same place. But mentors are a big part of that. So I'm going to start on this map, kind of right in the middle. So my two different examples, the first one involves an international residency as an artist and a variety of exhibitions. So starting here in the middle at an international residency that I did at Belfast at Flax Art Studios, that really came about because of a mentor that I had in graduate school. Sean Miller was a professor, and I taught with him in a foundations program. He was one of the artists that ran that program, and he was also on my graduate committee. And he was a really important mentor to me because he incorporated performance art in what he did as an artist. And his work was just funny, and I didn't know that many artists that were making work that was really funny in that way. And he really supported my interest in performance art. I came to school with a background in art history and ceramics, and just became interested in performance art, didn't know much about it. And you know, when you're in graduate school, you're sort of trying out new ideas with your work and sort of dipping your toe in the water, but you kind of need someone there to say, yeah, jump in, like just don't dip your toe in. And he was that person for me. So he is one of the reasons I ended up teaching at Sam Houston State. He just recommended me because I taught with him. He thought that they would be interested in me working there. That worked out. However, when I was at that job, there was a tenure track position available for the following year, and I applied and I didn't get it. And failing to get that job left me with this option of pursuing this other part of my career that I always wanted to do, but always felt like, you know, the job's the most important thing. Well, I didn't have that job. So I did. So he said, you know, you might want to apply to this residency program. I've done it recently. Belfast has a history of performance art. There's a lot of well-known performance artists from that city, and they really love performance art there. I think they'd be interested in your proposal. So I did, and I got it. And that same year, the same mentor invited me to be part of an exhibition he was developing. And one of the projects that Sean Miller has is that he has a miniature museum. This miniature museum he developed when I was in graduate school, and it allows him, it's really brilliant. So this miniature museum is his project. So everything he does, it's his work. However, it's a museum. So everything he does with the museum incorporates other artists. So he gets to do his work, and he gets to give other artists opportunities every single time he does something. Brilliant. So he invited me and lots of other artists to do a project where he would send everybody like a floor plan of the museum, and you would propose a show. But instead of a regular museum where you would get all the proposals and one person would get the show, he made an exhibition out of the proposals. So all the proposals were the exhibition. It wasn't the way that I worked. I don't work two-dimensionally, so it was a challenge for me. And as I recall at that time, I felt like I didn't have time to do it. But it was a great opportunity and a challenge, so I said, all right. So a lot of late nights later, I made the work, and it ended up showing at a gallery in Belfast, in a museum in Italy. And then a curator who worked at that gallery in Belfast, where that show was, and nearby where I did the residency, saw my work and invited me into another show later. That residency ended up being something that I could present at conferences. And the show that I was a part of with the artist Sean Miller and his museum traveled later to Florida. And then just to illustrate what this looks like, so there's the artist Sean Miller with his miniature museum in a parade in Bavaria, because it is what he calls location variable museum. It's so beautiful. The museum can go everywhere. So there he is traveling with an exhibition inside the museum of someone else's work with his own work in the parade. There's the one of the gallery proposal, sort of blank slates that he would send all the artists, and then the two pieces that I did for that. The first one was inspired by Willa Cather's O Pioneers, and that's all the text that you see around it, so it's a collage, and all of the flower part is collaged, and then the bottom is pen and collage so this piece was sort of about the farm crisis in the 1980s, and all this text here are the crop prices leading up to and during and after the farm crisis in the 80s. So those are the two pieces I did for that show. This is the building where the Flax Art Studios is housed in Belfast, where the residency, where the international residents work with other artists in that building. And then this is the project that I did as part of that residency. So I proposed to make a traveling tea cart where I could set it up on different streets in Belfast and invite people to have tea with me. All of these things terrify me, by the way. Like, performance art scares me. That's why I love it. This is terrifying to me, and I was terrified to do it, and I didn't know if it would fail. However, didn't fail, but it was still scary, and I stood out on a street, and sometimes it just looked like that, me standing there. Invited people to have tea with me, but everyone loves to have tea in Ireland, so Northern Ireland. So that part was easy. Also, they love to talk and tell you stories, so that worked out in my favor. So all in all, it was a really wonderful experience. So the next example I'm showing you is how I came to meet other artists that I could collaborate with. A totally different way of working for me. But how does that happen? How do you meet those people that would want to work with you? So this also starts in graduate school with a different professor and a fellow artist that I was in school with. The artist I was in school with was one of 3 people who started a residency program in Maine called Watershed. And I remember her mentioning this to me in graduate school when I became interested in performance art. She said, you know, someday you should apply to this program because no one's ever done anything with performance art there. I think they'd be interested. I was like, okay, I tucked that away. This professor in graduate school, in my burgeoning interest in performance art, very different from ceramics, and she was a ceramic professor, had given me advice at one point to sort of go find your community, which felt to me at the time very much like, we're not your people. Like, go find them. That's how it felt. But it was a good push. And she was also a big advocate of presenting at conferences, which terrified me. However, years later, at the suggestion of another artist friend who said, you know, if you're not going to do this, I will. I was like, okay, no, that's my idea, I'll do it. So I did it. I put together a lecture, proposed it, was accepted, presented it at the National Ceramic Conference, and then, lo and behold, other artists who were interested in those odd intersections came to the talk. I met them. I did apply for the residency where you would invite other artists to come with you around the theme of performance art at the Watershed Center in Maine. And I met my people. All my people came. They came. I met them, and we ended up collaborating, and we formed a collaborative performance group called the Brick Factory. We made a bunch of work together, and that was then exhibited at different locations and was published in a book. We've lectured about it, and we did another residency at the same place in 2017 to continue working together because we're actually located all over the country and in Canada. So this is the residency in Maine. This is the top is where the artists live when they're there, and then the studio where we work. And here's an example of some of the things that we did. Because we had this odd kind of intersection of interests in performance art, we sort of were looking back at the history of performance art, which kind of started in the 1960s and 70s in contemporary art. And we looked at sort of what was within that canon of really well-known performance pieces, but also within our specific field of ceramics, who was doing performances way back then? What's the history of performance in our medium? And there were examples of that. So what we would do is sort of, in learning about these performances, we would sort of restage them, but through the lens of ceramics and through kind of our own combination of humor and odd interests. So here we're redoing this performance from the 1972 where artists dipped their head in slip and then sat in a room all day letting it dry on their heads. It was kind of more meditative. Our version, we just blasted Bowie's Changes, dipped our head in slip, and sang it. Then we later proposed to exhibit our work at a conference, and we restaged other pieces, such as 433 of John Cage Renown, where we opened a bag of clay, sat and stared at it for 4 minutes and 33 seconds, folded it back up again. And one thing that happens at ceramic conferences are lots of technical demonstrations. So we're sort of teasing about that. So our technical demonstration was a glazing demonstration where we invited people to come and have their nails painted, glazing, while we read them technical ceramic manuals, the most dry thing ever. And then at the most recent residency, we continued our collaborative work, but trying to develop performances that could involve even more people. So this piece, we had a solstice walk. We're attempting to make a perfect circle. So we were tethered to a rope tied from the center of the circle. And from sunup to sundown, we would walk in stages. So there were 17 people who would walk continuously for the day to make our perfect circle. So the next example I'm going to show you is an alum from Westminster. His name is Steve Totin. He graduated in 2014. And because he's only 5.5 years out of undergrad, I think he's a really interesting example. And he's a great example of someone who takes opportunities and seeks them out and always says yes. So this starts back in 2014 when he was a senior, and Professor Peggy Cox let him know about a drawing symposium at Carnegie Mellon. So he went, because it's Steve and he would go. And when he was there, he saw the work of an artist, Joshua Close, really liked his work, followed him on Instagram, later, the same artist followed Steve back, started noticing Steve's work. Another thing Steve saw an opportunity for and took it up, said yes to this. There was a performance artist who's really well known. Her name is Marina Abramovic, and she had an opportunity where you could donate $20 to one of her projects, and in exchange, you could have an opportunity to get a free hug from her. She had to go to Brooklyn, so he did, because it's Steve. So he went to Brooklyn, got his hug, posted it on Instagram, and this artist who was following him got all confused, thought Steve lived in Brooklyn. He's like, hey, I'd love to do a studio visit. I really liked your work. Steve's like, I don't live in New York. But they worked it out. Steve drove his work to New York, had a studio visit with the artist. The artist hired him to make sculptures for him. And then those sculptures that Steve made were in a show in New York. At that show in New York, Steve met a director of a graduate program at Maryland Institute College Bar. Around the same time, he got accepted into a show at the Sculpture Center in Cleveland where he met the director, who was good friends with someone, a different person, directed a different program at the Maryland Institute. He applied to that graduate program, got in, worked with that person, and then halfway through graduate school, an artist reached out to him about a new residency that a collector was developing, and she put his name in. She suggested Steve. She knew about Steve through her friend Yashua. At this residency that Steve applies to and gets in, he meets a guy who teaches at a private school called St. George's in Rhode Island. And he said, hey, I'm going on sabbatical in a year. If you're interested. So he's like, yes, I am. So put in his resume, and after he graduated from graduate school, got the job and is still teaching at St. George's. So here's what that looks like. This is the work by Yashua Close, the artist that Steve saw at that conference. This is a woodblock print. And you can see in looking at it why Steve would be interested in his work based on what Steve's work looks like. This is Steve getting his free hug by the artist, Marina Abramovic. There's Steve and the artist Yashua Close at his opening in New York. And that's the sculpture Steve built for the artist. And then this is Steve's work. So this is the piece that was accepted into that show in Cleveland and where he met the director of the Sculpture Center. And then on the left is the work by the artist who recommended Steve to the residency. That's the piece of hers that the collector owned, and it's the collector who started that residency program. There's Steve in the middle with all the artists on that residency that summer, and on the far left is the artist who worked at St. George's where Steve now works. And then the last example I'm going to show you, I know this is kind of hard to see because the text is small, but this example is about, it comes from an artist who teaches at Youngstown State printmaking, and he has developed two different study abroad programs, one in Venice and one in Glasgow, Scotland, and how he arrived at that, at doing something like that. How does a person end up putting together a study abroad program in two different locations like that? Well, his map starts way back in high school. So the whole reason that he ended up even pursuing art, and that's one of those disciplines where there often is someone kind of pushing you at some point saying, you're really good at this, like you should consider going to school for this. So she did. She encouraged him to apply to art school. He did. Decided instead to go to a junior college for a couple of years. Met a professor there who was really encouraging. Encouraged him to apply to the Art Institute of Chicago, which he did. Got a scholarship there. And he ended up taking a class in lithography. Didn't know what that was. It's a printmaking medium. Fell in love with it. Met another graduate student with the same interests. And he found out about this place in Albuquerque where you could go to a printer training program. So he did that after undergrad. Went to this printer training program in Albuquerque. And because there aren't many of these printer training programs, and what they do is they train people to be professional printers. So artists from all over the world would go to these print centers and have their work printed for them. So a lot of times when you see the work of a famous artist in print form, it was made at one of these print centers. So that's what you learn to do. But he met a lot of other artists there. One was from, his name is Plinio Avila. He's from Zacatecas, Mexico. And this artist later invited Joe, this artist Joe Duda, back to his studio in Zacatecas. So jump ahead as to sort of here, where the artist that he met at the printer training program invited him to Zacatecas for a printmaking symposium. He met an artist there from Scotland. After the printer training program, he goes to graduate school, ends up connecting to a graduate professor who invites him to come with him on a Venice study abroad program and be his assistant. He later retired and handed that program off to Joe. So this artist that he met in Scotland, he ends up going to Scotland because he met this person and ends up developing a study abroad program from that studio. Here's two different examples of prints because we don't offer printmaking here, and I'll explain a little bit. Lithography is a printmaking method where you print off of a stone, and then on the right is a print composed of 3 different types. So there's a digital print and then screen printing on top of that with a layer of flocking over top of that. On the left is an image of YSU students on the Venice Study Abroad program with the other professor who collaborated with him, the art history professor. And then there's the group of students in Venice. And there's the artist Joe Duva doing a screen printing demonstration at the Glasgow Print Studio where the second study abroad program is developed out of. And then the group of students at Stirling Castle in Glasgow, Scotland. I believe that is my last slide.